All right, folks, just before we get going, a quick word about the engine behind it all, Purple Patch Coaching. If you're an athlete looking to perform at your best, whether you're chasing your first Ironman finish, a podium spot, or simply want to thrive in work or life, Purple Patch Tri Squad is your home base. With customized training, strength integration, direct access to the whole team of Purple Patch coaches, Tri Squad provides everything that you need to train smarter, not harder. It's more than a training plan. It's a system, a performance community, and most importantly, it's built around your life to integrate into it, not conflict with it. Thousands of athletes around the world have used Tri Squad to train with purpose, race with confidence, live with energy. Now, I ask you this. Are you ready to join us? Head to Purple Patch Fitness to get started. Now, enjoy the show today. It's a goodie. It's about a Purple Patch athlete who does something quite extreme. 7 marathons in 7 days across 7 continents. The Marathon Challenge. Enjoy the show.
I'm Matt Dixon, and welcome to the Purple Patch Podcast. The mission of Purple Patch is to empower and educate every human being to reach their athletic potential. Through the lens of athletic potential, you reach your human potential. The purpose of this podcast is to help time-starved people everywhere integrate sport into life.
And welcome to the Purple Patch Podcast. As ever, your host, Matt Dixon. We are exploring the habits, mindsets, systems that fuel performance-ready living across work, sport, and life. And I'm your host, as ever, your Matt Dixon, founder, head coach of Purple Patch Fitness. And today's episode, well, quite frankly, it's a special one. We are diving into one of the most audacious and inspiring feats of endurance you're ever going to hear. 7 marathons in 7 days across 7 continents. It's one thing to want to go around the world on a wonderful backpacking experience, but in the course of a week, running a marathon every single day for every day of the week. Whew. Our guest today, Scot Davis, Purple Patch athlete who recently completed the World Marathon Challenge. It is running 7 marathons on 7 continents in just 1 week. But here's the thing, today's episode isn't just about running. It's about preparation, mindset. It's about applying high-performance systems to achieve something really quite extraordinary. Joining us in the show as well is his coach, Will Turner, Purple Patch Senior Coach, one of the leading experts in ultra-endurance coaching. Will himself is an incredibly accomplished endurance athlete and has done many things akin and parallel to this sort of craziness, as I might label it. But he's also the architect behind Scot's preparation, helping him navigate the demands of training, recovery, and execution while, and get this, Scot being a very busy executive and wholly engaged father with a family. Now, before we dive into the family itself, I want to give you a little context on Scot because his story is a masterclass in balancing high-level professional life, family, and of course the extreme endurance pursuits. Scot Davis is the Chief Operating Officer at Crow Holdings, privately owned real estate investment and development firm headquartered in Dallas. With a background in law, finance, and operations, Scot plays a key role in overseeing strategy and execution across one of the most respected names in US real estate. Now, beyond the boardroom, Scot is also a committed endurance athlete, a father of 4, yes, 4, and after this year, a global marathoner. Goodness me. In today's show, we're going to unpack why Scot took on the challenge in the first place, what it took to prepare without actually breaking down, both physically and emotionally, what happened every single day across all 7 days on his little trot around the globe, and then, of course, we wanted to unpack some of the powerful lessons that he's walking away with. And so whether you're an athlete, an executive, someone to look to stretch your own limits, this is the show for you today. And so without further ado, I give you Scot Davis, Will Turner, his coach, in today's episode. It is the meat and potatoes. All right, it is the meat and potatoes, and this is an episode, folks, where you need to fasten your seatbelts. I'm delighted to welcome Purple Patch Senior Coach Will. Thanks a lot for joining us on here, and one
Great
of
to be here.
one of your coached athletes, Scott Davis. Scott, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Glad to
I
be here.
am I am humbled to be in the presence of you two guys and your crazy athletic accomplishments. But we want to shine the light on, as I mentioned in the introduction, Scott, your recent performance. And I've been writing it down as 7 by 7 by 7 and 7 marathons on 7 continents in 7 days. And it conjures up straight away, oh my goodness me, that's hard. And then the next question is, phew, what about all of the logistics? So in preparation for this podcast, I started to write down all the questions, and there was probably 200 questions I had, and I filtered it all down to just one single question, which is why. But I won't ask you that now. We want to first ground in is an amazing accomplishment. I want to first say congratulations.
Thank you.
Great accomplishment.
Indeed.
And really well done, both of you. We're going to unpack the coaching relationship in the course of this conversation. We're going to dig into what the experience is like, where some of the euphoria was and where some of the struggle was, and understand some of the logistics and the challenge. And but to ground us, as I love to do with all guests, Scott, I think it's really, really helpful, and particularly in your case, by the way, because you've just done this amazing feat. I'd love to have some background just in broader life. Where did you grow up? Where you living now? Family situation? What do you do professionally? Just give listeners a little bit of grounding of who is Scott Davis.
Yeah, I grew up in Houston. I've lived here my entire life. I met my wife, Billy, about 26 years ago, and we've been married almost, I guess, 22 years. We've got 3 kids. Austin is a college freshman. He's 19. Dylan's a high school junior. He's 17. And Lauren's a freshman in high school. She's 15. So, I went to school here. I never left. So Houston's my home. And professionally, I'm a real estate developer. We focus on multifamily development. I've been here at Trammell Residential for about 19 years. So,
Okay. So you are you're busy,
very,
family, 3
very.
kids, all in, and very busy professional. I think that's the first grounding. I can't help. I want to ask about sports because one thing that just popped up for me is Houston. It's not the trail running mecca of the world. It's not sort of known as a running capital per se, although it does have the Houston Marathon, of course. But I'd love to know your history of sports growing up. Were you always an endurance athlete? What did you do as a young puppy growing up?
No, actually, I started growing late, so I wasn't very athletic. I played sports when I was younger, and then in high school I was, the equipment manager. So I developed late and really got into running. Gosh, probably about 24 years ago.
Mm,
I started. I primarily trained in the gym, and I joined a boot camp program in our Memorial Park. I was run by a former Navy SEAL, and I joined, and we had to go through a 2-week boot camp, and I loved it, and that was the
mm,
first time I really got into running, and 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 it was really shorter distance, say 10 miles and under, and then in 2010 I ran my first marathon. I ran it injured, and I finished, but I said, okay, I've checked that box and never want to do that again. And so, but yeah, that's where I started. I started running for the first time.
fantastic. Well, let's get into this thing. I think many of the listeners will have heard of this thing happening before. 7 by 7 by 7, as I call it. What inspired you to take on this challenge? Is this something that you're sort of building towards, or was there a specific moment or realization that you're like, let's do this?
It was a little bit of an evolution, in May of 20, it really kind of started in May of 2023. I had been
Mhm.
caring for my mom. She had was battling pancreatic cancer. And it had been going on for about 2.5 years. And I felt like I needed some kind of outlet. And my wife and I were driving home from Dallas back to Houston late one night. And I looked over and I said, "Hey, can you look and see if there's a marathon in Antarctica?" Because at the time, that was kind of the hardest thing I could think of. And she looked at me like I was crazy, but she found a company called Runbuck that does a marathon in Antarctica. And I looked it over, and the next weekend I went out and ran 20 miles to see if I could do it. And I did, and it was miserable. I said, "Okay, now I need to train." So I trained for that. I ran in Antarctica, and it was actually, I ran that race 2 months after my mom passed away in December 2023.
Mm-hmm.
And Runbuck offered another marathon 2 days later when we returned to Chile, so that everybody could disperse and go home. So I ran that, and I'd always been intrigued by the World Marathon Challenge. So that kind of started my wheels turning. And a couple weeks after that, I ran the Houston Marathon. So, I ran 3 marathons in 30 days. And so I came back to Houston, or when I got done with Houston Marathon, I sat down with my coach at the time and said, "Hey, I want to do this." And we were exactly a year out. And, he strongly suggested I train for 2 years and, give myself time, and I wasn't going to have it. And so he agreed to work with me, and off we went. But I think,
And I just want to point out I wasn't his coach back then.
right. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. This is pre-Purple Patch, isn't
Pre
it?
Purple
Right.
Patch. Yeah. And, it was, I think it started off as a kind of an outlet for me, and dealing with, my mom's illness and being a caregiver. But then also by that point, when you're caring for somebody like that, it kind of gives you some perspective that, everybody kind of, puts things off. I want to do this someday, or, I'm going to do this, but I'm going to wait a year. And it kind of gave me a sense of urgency that, hey, I'm in my early 50s, and all these things I've talked about doing before, I need to go do it and
Yeah.
take some risk.
Well, before we dive into the training, because I think that's a really fascinating part of it, is the journey towards there. And you can almost had 2 chapters of that. I know, like sort of, we'll call it sort of pre-Purple Patch,
Yeah.
and then Will's guidance under Purple Patch. But uh, just ground people. Let's make sure that all listeners understand. Just give us a minute or two of the event, because it's really crazy. What does it entail? Where did the journey start? And just walk us through the route, continent by continent, literally.
Yeah, this is an event that's put on by Runbuck, and there's 60 athletes that participated, and we all met in Cape Town. That's where we had our pre-race briefings, and everybody kind of staged. And from Cape Town, we took a cargo plane, a Russian cargo plane, to Antarctica, to Ultima Base in Antarctica. And we ran the marathon there. And then we came back to Cape Town and ran that marathon. And then from that point, we boarded a custom 767 that had, 80 business class seats, so we could lay back.
Oh, wow.
And so from Cape Town, we went to Perth, Australia. And then from Perth, we went to Dubai, and then Madrid and Fortaleza, Brazil. And then we finished in Miami.
Wow.
And our group, as a group, we set the world record for total duration. So it was the previous record was over 6 days. Our group finished it in under 6. So the winner of the last race actually set the world record. I think it was 5 days, 19 hours.
So it was 7 marathons in 5 days, 19 hours by the winner of the
Right.
total race. Oh, it's unbelievable. So that answers my immediate question, which I'm sure many of like, oh my goodness me, how did you possibly do this? Because you couldn't do it in this time frame on regular commercial
Right.
flights. It's something okay.
Right.
And
Or regular marathon routes, right?
Right.
It's
yeah.
you're
So-
not just jumping into the marathon in Madrid. It's a custom marathon just for that group.
Right.
Custom marathon just for that group, which is really important. And then, of course, you're it's well thought out of navigating the time zones. So each one of them has to be linked up with feasible flight times and stuff like that. So you're managing huge travel stress, huge time zone stress, which I guess in some ways is perhaps less of a relevance because who cares what kind of time of day it is.
Right. That's,
You're navigating fueling and hydration and everything else, but beyond the the single thing of even if you stayed on an airstrip and just sat there doing a marathon every single day, the physical load, there's all of the other
right.
sort of stresses that come with it. Um, Hugely empowering. So I'm guessing when let's go back and we'll start with pre-purple patch first, leading up into it, and I know that there was a transition point. You decided to hop off from the prior coach, go to Will, and then we're going to bring Will's perspective into this.
Yeah.
Go back first. What was life like leading up to it when you started? You had a year to get ready. You started on the journey. You've got you're a husband, you're a father, you're a very busy professional. What was life like? What was training like? How did you quote balance all of these things?
Well, my previous coach, he's a really good person, good coach,
Yeah.
and the plan that he developed for me was where I was building up my mileage. So we really started February 1st of 2024, and we in each month we increased the mileage. I think I got up close to my top mileage in a month. I think was around 300 miles. And so we would go 4 to 6 weeks and we would have a really high volume week where I was running really high volume for 7 days in a row.
Mhm.
And, um, when you're running that much mileage day after day, it takes a physical toll, but it also just from a time standpoint, it's really tough. Um, some days I would have to, get up at 1:30 in the morning to get my run in. And then I would I teach a boot camp class. I would do that. And then it's, into the office. And then work on all the recovery stuff with the recovery professionals that I work with. And then, in the evenings, it's usually, kids have games and activities and stuff that I want to make. And then, I try to get in bed by, 9 or 10, and then I'm up, the next morning. So it was challenging. But, um, you know, the only time of day that I can control is early in the morning. So I get up at whatever time I need to get my work in. Um,
And
um,
sleep is sacrificed and a lot of other things,
right.
yeah, along
yeah,
the way.
yeah, a lot of, and it was from a modality standpoint, you were running, and running. Yeah,
Right.
was that? Yeah, so
Yeah.
it was pure running. As I listen, my ears prick up, but sleep compromise. What about fueling and caloric intake? Were you really intentional about that? Was it piling in the calories on a day-to-day basis?
Um, you know, I was overtrained, and so when you're overtrained, sometimes your appetite disappears. And then
Yeah.
also in Houston, starting in May, it gets really hot and humid, and the summers are brutal. And then I had a hard time wanting to eat in those situations as well. And so I started working with a nutritionist, Kelly Jones, um, that really helped me a lot with, finding foods that were not only good for me, but that I wanted to eat. And so
Mhm.
really got my calorie intake um, up. And then also, in the Houston heat, there was, everyone's different. And so I had to figure out what my hydration and caloric requirements were for those long runs in the heat and I needed to figure it out because there were several climates that were really warm during the World Marathon Challenge. And so Kelly really helped me with that. There's a lot of trial and error, a lot of error. And I just really had to figure it out.
So what was fast forward? You made a change and you're on a journey, and by all accounts, and I want to make sure I double underline this. You had a really good relationship with and a lot of success with your prior coach. So
Sure.
I want to make sure this
Sure.
isn't looking at the prior coach and saying, "Ha, bag." Now
Right.
Purple Patch comes in and rescue you. That's not the tone, but you did make a change halfway through the journey. Was there a catalyst for that? Was there something that sort of just thought, you know what, I need to shift up the recipe here a little bit. Pardon the
Yeah, I
pun.
mean, I had, running in the Houston Heat, there were a couple of instances where I passed out because I
Mhm.
was pushing myself way too hard. And I also, I was still trying to figure out what my body needed in those extreme situations. I haven't been running marathons that long. And so I was still trying to figure it out. In some ways, I still am. And I had one instance where I passed out when I was on a run. I didn't feel great. I finished my long run, and I thought I just needed to get home and eat, and I passed out driving home, and that was kind of a wake up call. And I really had to stop. And this was in August, and my event was in January. So I had some concerns about making a change, but I just felt like it was the right thing to do at that time. I just felt like I needed a new direction.
Well, okay. Well, it's probably a good timing to bring in Will here. Will, and I think it's really important to for the listeners to highlight. Will is a senior Purple Patch coach. Will, it's the first time on the show. You haven't been on the show yet.
Right.
But you and I do a lot of work with each other. Go and do a lot of leadership workshops and things along those lines. But for listeners, Will has, amongst all of the Purple Patch coaches, by far the most experience in these types of crazy things. I mean, Will, you've done back to back to back to back to back to back to back Ironman races continue. You've done a lot of ultra endurance racing, so you come with the pedigree to help. I'm really interested when you took Scott on, and and what were your first impressions? You sort of heard this story. What, as an athlete,
Yeah.
what was sort of your instinct?
Well, first off, I was very excited because, that's kind of my wheelhouse. And I was excited because I love people that go after big, hairy, audacious
Mhm.
goals. And Scott was doing that. And I knew that was going to be a very transformative experience. So as a coach, it's very rewarding. I also knew that I did have the experience to kind of help and shepherd him through the process. So I was excited about being able to do that. I was very concerned, however, as a coach. I kind of got the background that he had passed out while driving, and found out that he was running basically 6 days a week and running large volumes. And I was concerned that he was in this. I wasn't happy that he had the incident that he had that kind of flipped the switch for him,
Yeah,
but I knew it was probably beneficial for my relationship because he was ready for a change because what he was doing was no longer working for him. My concern was he ready to really make a a big shift in the way that we would approach the rest of his training in a way that would make him feel comfortable and confident with how we were moving forward, because we basically cut his running volume down from 6 days a week, averaging a lot in the in August and even prior in July. Looking back at his training peaks plan that he had with his prior coach, he was running some big mileage, as he said earlier, but often he was running about 70 miles a week, um, double digits most days. And I was cutting him down to about 3 to 4 runs a week, wanting to get that running mileage down to about half of what it was, at least, and also wanting to introduce some cross training, introduce some strength training, introduce a real focus on nutrition. And he was starting to dial that in with his nutritionist, but really wanting to dial in all those aspects that were going to help support him on this journey for the next 6 months. And probably the biggest little concern I had when we initially talked was when I was talking to him about doing cross training. He was a little resistant, right, Scott? And
The bike.
I was like, we can bike, we can swim, we can, row, we can find another, outlet for cardio. And he's like, I don't have a bike, I don't swim, I don't row. I'm like, okay, we've got to figure this out. And he had a stationary bike. that he could use. And so, I mean, that's how we started leveraging 2 cross training days a week. And I added also a rest and recovery day in there to make sure that he was just having a full day of recovery throughout the rest of his very busy week.
So it echoes and parallels very much the sort of purple patch approach of marathon running. I mean, we've talked a lot on the show about getting athletes to go very, very fast relative to their prior performances by leveraging multi-sport and, of course, strength and conditioning. But I can't help but come back to you, Scott. That's got to be a little bit of a mind twist. You know, it certainly took, and I'll say it right now, well done on being really, really brave on this. But you must have had a little bit of fear of like, welcome to your new coach. We're going to half your volume. Like that must have been at the start. Like, whoa, hang on, I want change, but I'm not ready for change. Change is hard. Yeah, change is really, really hard.
It is, and I had some concerns, doing it that close to the actual event because
Yeah,
I knew, I think Will and I talked for the first time in August. I think it was late August. And
Yeah.
then I figured there was going to be at least a 30-day get to know you period. And then, we were getting even closer to the event. So it was a little scary, but, once I got connected with Will and I talked to him, I really liked him. And yes, the change was a little scary. But he got me on the bike and, I've got a rower. And so, we changed things up a bit and, it was, my legs felt much better. And I actually felt stronger.
So I'd love, yeah, I got to ask that. Like, what was once you got that ball rolling proverbially, and it was like Will came in, bam, we're changing it all up right now. Like none of this, we're not going to go down this journey. You went with it, which by the way is not easy. I want to double underline for anyone. It's not easy. Change is not easy, even if it's positive change. And the fact you did that shows actually a lot of athletic IQ or a lot of coachability. I think that's a thing that we should highlight here. But once you got that, 4-6 weeks in, what was the impact of that? You've dropped down your volume, you've increased your other modalities in there, brought in multi-sport. Did you feel fitter, stronger, more in control, greater performance predictability? What was the sort of and finally confidence before you went into the event?
Yeah, my body felt better. My mind felt better. My legs felt stronger. Will, he put me on the bike for some pretty grueling workouts and, I hated every minute of it and he heard about it, but I really started seeing, my strength and everything improve. And so, I when I decided to go with Will, figured if I'm going to do this, I'm going to be all in. And he's so even keeled and he's got, he's obviously got the resume. And so, I just trusted him and it worked out. And, not running, as much was really hard because I was used to going out day after day and grinding. And, credit to my previous coach that although I was doing so much volume, I had a really great running base for to work with, and that really carried me through the rest of the
Yeah.
year. So yeah, but yeah, Will really came in and changed things up, and I think it made things better. I know it did.
Yeah,
It-
and I mean, one thing that you would often tell me is that you just felt less fatigued,
Right.
which, you're coming in fresher to your workouts. So you're fit and fresh, as we
Right.
like to say at Purple Patch, which was a great thing. And even though there was resistance with the biking, you complained about it. You also, as I would kind of press him on, it's like, hey, I know it's working, so I'm doing it,
Right.
but I need every minute of it type of thing.
Mhm.
it's often the way.
It's like his first thing was, "How can anybody stay on the bike for an hour? That seems awful." And I'm like,
Yeah.
Share you. Well, let's go through the experience because I'm sure listeners are desperate to hear this thing because, running a single marathon, tough. 7 days in a row, different continents and everyone, sleep deprivation, time shifts. It's a whole nother level. Here's my first one. Of the 7, which one was the toughest and why? There must have been 1 or 2 that were just harder.
I I mean, I think the worst one was probably was Fortaleza, Brazil. We had just run in Madrid, 12 or 14 hours before, and we flew all night. We got to Brazil early that morning. We were running by 6 a.m. And, um, and because we had turbulence on the plane, they weren't able to feed us before the run. And I was, so I was in a calorie deficit. I hadn't had a chance to really rehydrate. I didn't sleep. And so we get there and we start running. And because we're right on the equator, that sun came up fast. And before we knew it, it was, 92, 93 degrees and really high humidity and no shade. And I got into the run and I had some spasms in my legs and said, okay, I just need to dial it back. So I dialed it way back because at that point it was just, finish. So that one was especially difficult. And then really the first two marathons, Antarctica and Cape Town, were difficult because I was running a fever and had nausea, and so it just wasn't, it was tough. So I think those were the ones that stand out.
Well, I want to ask and I want to separate this into the physical first. Then I'm going to ask about the mental challenges because it's obviously a physical challenge, but it's also a mental challenge. Clearly, what were the biggest physical challenges you faced? You obviously had the heat stress, and then obviously that's an inauspicious start. Having the first two, navigating with a fever. I mean, that must have been emotionally very challenging as well. But what were the major, do you have any major injuries or huge fatigue points or breakdown moments in any of these? What was the physical side of it?
No, I mean, it was the first two. Obviously, I was sick, and then that kind of, although the fever broke after the second race, you know, I had, the illness kind of stayed with me. I didn't feel great. I didn't feel strong. Physically, there was nothing major. I had a couple of just aches and pains, but,
And
that's,
a good blister.
oh, that's right. Yeah. After Antarctica, I was wearing a specific kind of trail shoe for Antarctica, and I had a blister on the end of one of my toes, and it took over the entire end of my toe and under the nail bed. And I let it go. And then by the end of the third marathon, I thought you should go see the doctor. And so he fixed it up for me, and off I went. But I think I sent Will a picture.
I got the picture. Yes.
So yeah.
Where do I sign up for this event?
Yeah.
Anyway, carry on.
But yeah, I mean, those were the biggest, physically, those were the biggest issues.
So it leads into the mental challenges and roadblocks, and I mean, I'm sure the sickness side was probably a huge weight on the shoulders. But what's sort of the mental side of it? I can't imagine. There's an old saying, "Fatigue makes cowards of us all," type thing,
Right.
and you've obviously got the accumulation of fatigue. So I'm fascinated on the mental side of this.
Well, Will and I have talked about this, and when I started training for this event, I worked on the mental side as hard as I did the physical side. I didn't cut myself any slack. I ran 2,500 miles training for this thing last year, and I ran when I was sick. I ran in all kinds of weather. I ran when I hurt. I ran when I was sleep deprived. I didn't cut myself any slack. So going into and I knew that, with the World Marathon Challenge, I either finished it or I didn't, and there weren't going to be any excuses. And so I just put myself in, as many difficult situations going into it as I could. I didn't ever imagine that I would be hit with all those things at once. The difficult weather, being sick, being sleep deprived, you calorie deprived. But I felt like I was well prepared. And I remember in Antarctica, when I had the fever, and I would have to stop periodically, and I'd be dry heaving. And it's like, well, you got yourself into this, and there's really only one way out. It's to finish, because I'm not going home. And so, you just put one foot in front of the other and keep going. I just didn't give myself any other option.
What?
Yeah, and just I'll interrupt here, Matt. And just from a coaching perspective, I mean, obviously going into this knowing that mindset's really critical for this, and because Scott was willing to kind of push himself in all these situations prior, and we had plenty of discussions about it. I knew that his mindset was solid, that, he was going to do whatever he could do to keep moving one foot in front of the other. And so, that there was a lot of assurance I had, and I think he had as well, the confidence that he could push through these really tough conditions. And we set up some pre-race situations. He did several marathons, and we doubled up clustered runs before his marathons. So he'd have 2 or 3 big days right in a row, and he'd be flying to these marathons. So he would be dealing with flight fatigue and dealing with different protocols he could use to help him in the World Marathon Challenge. So all of that was done very strategically to make sure that he had all the things that he needed going into it. And I felt confident as a coach that he was fully prepared. And I think, Scott, you felt the same way, that you were just going to get it done and there wasn't another option unless somebody was going to wheel you away in the cart or something.
It's the ultimate control the controllables in
Yeah.
many ways. It's like, okay, I can't control the conditions or the fever, but what I can control is where I'm placing my mind and energy. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's. I am interested in euphoria a little bit because it occurs. Did you have moments or blocks where perhaps fatigue induced or stress induced that you had these euphoric moments as well? Do you remember? Because I think a lot of people that it's such a big thing that there's a danger that people just can't identify with it at all, and they assume that it's just down in the trenches,
Mhm.
suffering always. So I'm wondering, I assume that you also had these moments of just amazing. I don't want to call it euphoria because it makes it sound like it's peak, but you just had these wells of really positive experiences. Was that along the way?
Yeah, I mean, I had a really good run in Madrid. Um, I felt decent. I was still sick, but I felt decent. The weather was cooler, and the course in Madrid was a racetrack, and so we
Mm,
went 11 times around this racetrack, and it had 2 really nasty hills in it, and the course kind of banked a little bit because it was a racetrack, but I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the weather was nice, and it was really my first good race, where I felt better than I had the previous 3. Um, and then in Miami, that was really great because I was expecting my wife and a couple of friends to show up, but she brought my whole office. And so they surprised me, which was really nice. And so that gave me a boost for the very last one, going into it because, again, after we ran in Fortaleza, um, we took off that evening from Fortaleza. We arrived in Miami, I think around midnight. We started running by 2, or 1 or 2. And so, that gave me a boost to finish. And that was one of my better races as well. So
fantastic.
It was your fastest race, yeah.
yeah,
Fastest race was the last race. It's
Last race, yeah.
yeah.
staggering. This. So I got 2 more questions, and I'm going to ask some lessons. But one, it's funny when we go away to take people to training camps, and we do that frequently, and we really get people out of their comfort zone relative to where they're at. But it's a shared experience. There's almost this shared mission
Mhm.
where it's like we're all doing this, and everyone's at very different levels. But
Yep.
something really magical occurs when you take a group of people, and they can be strangers. You get them way out of their comfort zone with a sense of mission, and they're solving challenges together.
Mhm.
This is 60 people, very much a shared mission. Individually, I
Right.
want to try and finish this, but it's all the same. So I am very, very interested in the collaboration, support, sort of team aspect. Was there a team aspect to it? Was it like real camaraderie despite the suffering?
Um, to a certain extent, everybody was there. We were all um, miserable and, trying to, I think everybody had their own way of accomplishing the goal.
Mm.
And it was really interesting to watch. You had the, what I'd call the elite runners, people that were doing marathon after marathon and, the 3:15 pace or 3:15 marathon. And then you had the people that were really experienced ultra marathoners or marathoners that power walked every race and just
Wow.
super consistent. And then you had all of us in between. And so, we would, we and it was usually kind of a loop course. And so we'd be passing each other and, we'd give high fives or thumbs up, but everybody kind of had their head down and,
Mm.
and we all made contacts and everything, but everybody was just, just trying to survive that week, honestly.
Try,
Um,
trying to survive. It's
yeah,
interesting.
and and we're on a chat group, and so everybody's chatting and whatnot still. But yeah, it was really about survival that week. We were all rooting for each other, but we were all trying to survive.
And was the finish line and days following? Was there what were the emotions crossing the finish line, and then what often happens is bizarrely a little bit of a letdown, a little bit of a. Did you go through that process? I'm really interested in the finish line and the subsequent days or weeks.
The finish line, it was great because my family and friends were there, but man, I was tired. Um,
Yeah.
I think I crossed the finish line. I just sat there with my hands on my knees and just for about 5 minutes. Um, so I got back to Houston and being sick, and I think I got 12 hours sleep all week, and I completely crashed. I was wiped out. I'm not one to take naps, but I think I took 6-hour naps for 3 days straight and then slept all night. Um, so I just really needed the recovery. Um, you know, I had I I was aware that after you work on a big goal for a long time, and then when you accomplish that goal, there can be a letdown. So I wanted to avoid that, and so I had a lot of time, a lot of miles to think about what I wanted to do next. And so I immediately jumped right into my next goal so that I could avoid that. And
Come on, it's not a 5K. What
No,
is it?
that's for the weird here.
Yeah, what is it? Come on,
um,
what have you two been conjuring up together?
well,
Danger couple.
it kind of evolved where I thought, okay, I want to do 30 marathons this year, and then it turned into 40, and then it's like, okay, well, let me see if I can do 50 marathons in a year. And it's again, I'm still not an experienced marathoner. I'm still learning with every training run, every marathon I do. But I like to challenge myself, and and with Will's help, and if I can stay healthy, then I think it's a good challenging goal. Um,
50 marathons, that's the goal, yeah?
yeah. Well, actually, it's 52, right, Will? Um,
That's right. He said 50. I'm like, you're 52 years old. You
right.
should at least do
And
52.
there's 52 weeks in the year. Why would you only
I,
possibly do
I,
50? You're limiting
I'm
yourself.
I'm Scott's CEO, Chief Enabler Officer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my
So
goodness.
I mean, it's all in with me staying healthy, and but
Injury free and focus on recovery.
right,
And yeah.
yeah. So see,
Amazing.
And we have those discussions every week when we have our coaching call
we do.
about your recovery and strength training and doing the things he needs to do,
Yeah.
which isn't a lot of volume at this point because basically we're racing, recovering, getting strong,
Mhm.
and just getting ready for the next
Mhm.
race.
Amazing. Scott, what would be your out of if you had to distill this experience, last question, what would be the top lesson or lessons that you've taken away? What would be the things that you've taken away that maybe can help listeners on their journey?
Um, I think it's finding good people to work with and guide you. Um, I was lucky to meet up with Will, and then I work with a great group of professionals. My chiropractor, Dr. Daniel DeWalch, Dr. Floyd Pallett of Rosti, Kelly Jones is my nutritionist. Um, I've got a great PT named Paige McKenzie at Bulletproof here in Houston. And just finding really great people to work with and guide you. I learned different things from each one of those people. I think having a really strong support system is key. I'm really fortunate. I've got a really supportive family. I've got a great team here at work. And then all those professionals I work with. And then you gotta put in the time, but be smart about it.
Put in the right time.
Right. And listen to your coaches and, really listen to your body. And look, I'm not always the best at that, but I'm learning, with Will's help and all the people I work with. But yeah, I think those are you got to put in the time, you got to grind, and you got to work on the mental part as much as the physical part. I think that's key.
Well done, both of you. Will, great coaching, but Scott, you own it's your journey and a fantastic accomplishment. And so that's part one. I really appreciate it. And thanks everyone for listening. But Scott, congratulations, a great job. Inspiring and a little bit of craziness, but fantastic, and your Purple Patch proud. So well done, and thank you for joining on the show.
Thank you, and Will, thank you for all your help.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Take care, guys. Guys, thanks so much for joining, and thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoyed the new format. You can never miss an episode by simply subscribing. Head to the Purple Patch channel of YouTube, and you will find it there, and you could subscribe. Of course, I'd like to ask you, if you will subscribe, also share it with your friends, and it's really helpful if you leave a nice positive review in the comments. Now, any questions that you have, let me know. Feel free to add a comment, and I will try my best to respond and support you on your performance journey. And in fact, as we commence this video podcast experience, if you have any feedback at all, as mentioned earlier in the show, we would love your help in helping us to improve. Simply email us at info@purplepatchfitness.com or leave it in the comments of the show at the Purple Patch page, and we will get you dialed in. We'd love constructive feedback. We are in a growth mindset, as we like to call it. And so feel free to share with your friends. But as I said, let's build this together. Let's make it something special. It's really fun. We're really trying hard to make it a special experience, and we want to welcome you into the Purple Patch community. With that, I hope you have a great week. Stay healthy, have fun, keep smiling, doing whatever you do. Take care.